Okay. um, in terms of donor outreach and going back to donor outreach, obviously it's an ongoing process. It's usually not something that happens for recipients in one conversation. So we want to be mindful of that and make sure that we're revisiting it with our patients as we see them. The process can involve stages of involvement and varying levels of interaction. It really is based on where the recipient is in their process with donor outreach and how comfortable they're feeling. It's common that some staff are more comfortable with this kind of conversation than others. And so it's hopeful that today, through the demonstration of the role plays, it will give you some ideas and some suggestions on how to have these conversations. But also the tools should hopefully be a help to you when you have the conversations, things that you can be referring to and material that will guide you in the conversations. And the tools are also meant for the recipients to take with them so that they can put their communication together. So the first role play we're going to do highlight several of the emotional barriers that recipients may have when they think about donor outreach. And after the role play, we want to identify some of the emotional barriers that came up. So watch for what you think is holding back this recipient. And then talk about ways and strategies that we can use to help them with those barriers, work through them. So Sharon is going to be the patient, and I am going to be the staff person. Okay. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you.
I know we had talked about meeting today, and one of the things I'm hoping that we can maybe look at is talking a bit about donor outreach and transplant, if that would be okay.
Sure, that's fine. I'll be honest with you, though. I really don't have anybody tasked to give me a kidney.
Okay. I certainly understand what you're saying, and it's difficult even to sort of contemplate conversations with those you do know around kidney donation, and our team is here to support you any way we can in this process. Sometimes to make it a little easier, people find it helpful to think about donor outreach more as an opportunity to share their story instead of focusing on how or who to ask for a kidney.
Well, whether I ask or share my story, it's hard for me either way. My family doesn't like to talk about these things, and so it doesn't really matter, and I don't think they'd come forward anyways. And I have a hard time talking to my friends about it too.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your honesty in helping me to understand. If we sort of look at it step by step, I appreciate talking or even thinking about donation when you don't think anybody will come forward to help is really hard. So when you think about what makes you most uncomfortable talking to your family or what is the most important uncomfortable thing about talking to your family or friends about your situation?
Well, needing a kidney is just a very uncomfortable topic to bring up with anyone, especially my family. I feel guilty about talking about being sick all the time and needing a kidney, and you know, they have their own lives. I don't want to make them sick too, and I don't want to be a burden on anyone.
Yeah, I understand. So does your family or are your friends making you feel like you're a burden?
Well, no, not specifically. Nobody's ever really said anything about that. It's just, I guess I just feel that way. My family tries to help me out when they can, but as I said, they have their own lives, and they've got kids and stuff, and it's just a lot.
Yeah. So it sounds like your family is caring and cares about your situation if they're trying to help you out, but it still feels to you like you don't have anyone to ask.
Yeah, that's right. It's maybe that I don't have anyone to ask. It's just that it's really very hard for me to ask my family or my friends.
Okay. So if you think about it more about communicating your need instead of directly asking for a donation, does that make it easier? Because it can be helpful to share with your family and others how you're feeling and what your medical situation is.
So that could be a good way to find a donor?
Yeah, just by starting to communicate your message and explain what your situation is. It's important to be open and honest. And usually when people talk about their need and potential donors understand, they often will offer to come forward and they want to help. They don't have to be asked for a donation. How would you feel about doing it that way?
Well, it might be easier than asking somebody directly, which is, as I said, really hard for me.
Mm-hmm. And by communicating your need that way, it gives those that you've been open with time to think about their situation, to consider whether donating would fit with them. And it's possible if your family was more aware of what's happening for you, they might step forward on their own. So sometimes we think people know more than they do, and it's important to not make assumptions, to assume that they wouldn't come forward or that they understand what your medical need is.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So can you tell me a little bit about how you've done donor outreach up until this point? What's it been like for you?
Well, I guess I told one guy I know about needing a transplant.
Okay, so it's good. You've made a start. Sometimes it's helpful to reach out to a group of people and talk to more than just one or two people.
Well, I guess since I've been sick, my circle of friends in the social circle is sort of, it's not that big, and I don't know that many people. My family doesn't know what I'm going through, and really, and no one's come forward.
So tell me a bit more about what your family knows about your situation.
Well, they know I'm sick.
Mm-hmm. And have you been able to talk to them about how you're feeling, or have they been invited to come to any of your appointments with you?
No, no, they haven't, and I haven't asked them to come to any appointments. I guess they know I'm on dialysis. They know I have kidney failure, and they know I need a kidney.
Okay, so it might be helpful to just talk with them a little bit more and share with them how you're feeling and what life is like for you, so they really understand, and so that they can understand how a transplant can really help.
Okay, I guess I could do that a little bit more.
Would you feel comfortable being open with your family by having face-to-face conversations, or does your family communicate in other ways, more like, say, through email or letters or blogs? Is that easier to write it down?
Talking is okay, but it might be easier and better for me to write it down.
Okay, so if you would like some time to think about the suggestions we've talked about and that I've made so far, we can talk about different ways to reach out to those you know, maybe at your next visit.
Oh, okay. Sure, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's our first Oscar performance. Okay, so in terms of that role play, what were some of the barriers the recipient was bringing forward? And for the people in the auditorium here, Dominic has told us you press on the white panel behind the little button in the seat in front of you if you wanted to speak. So what are some of the barriers that were brought up in that scenario? Okay.
The fact that she felt like a burden. Oh,
sorry?
The fact that she felt like a burden. She felt like her sickness was a burden that she couldn't share.
Yeah, that she was a burden.
But she didn't know if other people felt like that. It was just the way she felt.
Yeah. Okay.
A small social circle.
Small social circle, yeah. Yes, concern about her family and her relationships, yeah. Yeah, so some of the other ones was that she didn't think she had anyone to ask, that she was feeling guilty about going about doing the outreach, and as was mentioned, some of the donors' responsibilities. So there were some emotional barriers for this recipient as well as practical ones. So has anybody run into that in terms of their practice, people that have worked with patients around donor outreach? Are these barriers familiar to any of you? And if so, what worked when you were working with that patient to help them with it? Has anyone run into any of that with your patients? No. Okay.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi.
Joelle.
Hi,
social
Joelle.
worker from Kelowna. And all of the scenarios that you brought up today, I commonly hear from potential recipients. And I have found that some of the patients like it if I sit down with them on their next appointment and help them draft their words into a letter. And then some of them are sending that letter out by email or posting it as a Facebook post, or
Right.
having friends post it, friends or family post it on their behalf, and just sort of changing up the wording. They find that, some people say they find that more of a less assertive or more humble approach is to have somebody else tell their story.
Yes, yeah, and those are good points, and we're going to touch on those in a little bit as well. Joelle, from your experience, was there anything that you were able to do in your conversation or your practice that you felt helped the recipient move past those barriers?
Sometimes I ask people how to try to put themselves in the shoes of their friends and family, and how they would think and feel and respond if somebody that they cared about were in a situation of needing a kidney transplant. And
yes,
that then sometimes makes them realize that, or helps them realize that actually people in their life, even though it might not be a lot of people, might actually want to try to help and do something, because there's only so much that caring loved ones can do. But one of the things that they can do is to explore the option of donating.
right. Yeah, I think that's really important, and you make some really good points, Joelle, and I think that is a great strategy to have them think about it as if the shoe was on the other foot, because then it helps them understand the other perspective, like you're saying, and that can be really helpful. Any other comments or experiences people can talk about? Hi, Claire.
Thank you. I thought, moving from the point where Sharon said no, and then reframing it and reframing it and reframing it to get more information. I thought that was an excellent strategy.
Right. So to reframe and to continue to explore and really understand what's behind some of the concerns that are being brought forward, that helps as well. Yeah, and it helps the recipient process it too. Okay. So in terms of some of the strategies, they've been talked about, but just to summarize, it's important to assure the recipients that donors also don't have to be family, and discuss the donor pool and different social circles that are potential donors for them. It's surprising sometimes when recipients don't understand actually that it doesn't have to be a blood match or a blood relative in order to donate. As was touched upon, to validate and normalize their feelings, that they know that this is, they're not alone in what they're experiencing, what they're thinking, and how they're feeling, that other recipients experience it as well. The reframing, as Claire just talked about, and I think it's also really important when we can help recipients shift from thinking about asking for a kidney to communicating their need, because often donors are stepping forward once they hear about the need, they're never actually asked. And that's a real key point for many recipients to help them to move forward. And then it's also important for recipients to understand that moving through a donation, the process is really, it takes into account the donor's responsibilities and obligations, that we're very careful with our donors and that we thoroughly medically screen them. That can reassure the recipient as well about the people who may be stepping forward. Okay, so the other thing that is important is that sometimes for recipients to understand that donation isn't right for everybody. So there are often say it's a natural fit for me, and they just proceed through it. There are other donors who would really like to donate, but it's more of a struggle. It's not such a comfortable idea for them. So it's important for the recipient to understand that when people don't step forward, it's not based on their relationship to that person. Donation sometimes just isn't the right psychological fit for someone. Okay. So if we move now and start looking at some of the tools that are being developed, and how to actually go about starting outreach. So once your recipient is ready to begin the process, we want to talk with recipients about outreach and get a sense of how they normally communicate with their family and friends. So some people in their families are very open and they talk openly, and verbal communication is their normal route to go. Other families are less open in their communication, or they may prefer to talk one-on-one, and some families really don't discuss things openly at all. So we want to understand what's comfortable for this recipient, because that's the best avenue for them to take to talk about such a personal issue. So some recipients will prefer to communicate their need through personal contacts and discussions. Others will prefer to write it down and use letters. And someone mentioned, I think it was you, Joelle, sometimes people will choose someone to speak on their behalf and communicate their need. So you want to explore with the recipient the best form of outreach for them and what's most comfortable for them. And we also want to start helping them to formulate a plan. You want them to think about the specifics of their own situation and what they want as part of their outreach message. So what are the most important things to this recipient that's communicated along with their need for transplant? So once you've formulated a plan on how they'll do outreach and some of the content, you can introduce the tools that we'll talk a bit more about. And again, as I've mentioned, they serve as a foundation for the recipients to put their thoughts together and craft what they want to say. So we're just going to do another role play on how to go about introducing outreach, discussing some of the methods, and then how to use the tools. We also want to touch on some of the pros and cons of some of the outreach methods. Okay, so again, Sharon is going to be the patient, and I'm going to be the staff person. Okay, so I'm glad you've decided to begin donor outreach. How are you feeling about getting started?
Well, I'm hopeful this will work, but I guess I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed at how to get started.
Well, it's important to get the message out to your family and friends in a way that is comfortable and works for you. So maybe we should start by looking at what the best way is for you to do this. When you think about your family and how they normally communicate, how is it done? Like, do you have open discussions together as a group, or are you more private in your conversations?
We don't normally talk about things up front. I certainly wouldn't want to be talking to people in person about kidney transplant.
Okay. So would something like writing a letter or an email work better? Does that feel more comfortable by sending something out to others as opposed to talking about your need?
Yeah, I guess a letter or something would be better than talking about it up front. I really don't want anybody to feel like they're being put on the spot.
I understand. And it's good. It's good to think about the people you're writing to and how this letter or email would come across to them as you're putting your thoughts down. And there's certainly ways to write about your need for transplant so that potential donors won't feel put on the spot, but will understand your need for kidney transplant.
Oh, well, that would be really good, because, you know, I don't want to upset anybody, and I don't want to sort of close any doors.
Absolutely. And the advantage of writing it down is that you can take the time to put your thoughts down, review your letter as you go, and make sure you're saying it exactly in the way that you want to say it.
I've also heard that some recipients had somebody else sort of speak for them. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah. Some patients prefer to have family or close friend communicate and get the message out on their behalf. They're called donor champions or donor advocates. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess so. That might be a good option.
Yeah. If it's really hard for you to get your message out and it helps to have someone communicate on your behalf, then that's a good route to go. But it's important for you to be involved in the process anyway and to choose the right person for this, because it's important the advocate is on the same page with you about transplant. And will communicate the information that you want shared and in the way which is sensitive to donors, because you've already mentioned you really don't want any of your family or friends to feel upset or put on the spot. So it's important you're in control of what's communicated. Do you think you might want to use an advocate?
Yeah, I like the idea. I think of a letter better, and being able to get my thoughts sorted, and then that way I can make sure it comes out in the right way with a donor advocate. I wouldn't have that much, they would say what they wanted to say, and I feel more in control this way.
Okay. So in getting started, there are things you can certainly include in your letter and ways to say things that make a difference for the potential donors in receiving the information. So for example, it's like a good idea to address a letter or email to a group like Dear Family and Friends, rather than singling out one person.
Well, why is that?
Well, if it's addressed just to one person, they may think you're only approaching them, or they may feel that you expect a response from them. If it's addressed to a group, then people don't sort of feel like it's all on their shoulders, so it can be less pressure.
Oh, that makes sense. That would be better.
So you can start by letting people know about your medical situation and that you have been advised a kidney transplant is the best treatment option for you. So for you, what would you say about your medical situation? What are some of the things you'd include?
Well, I guess I would say that I have end-stage renal disease, and that it's related to my diabetes, and that doctors told me that I need a transplant, and that I'm hoping to avoid going on dialysis and do that if I can get a kidney transplant.
Mm-hmm. And a living donation helps you avoid a long wait list for deceased donation.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. That, sometimes 6 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So all of that would be great to include in your letter. And you tell people you're writing to let them know about your medical situation and see if anyone may be interested in exploring kidney donation for you.
Well, that sounds better than asking, outright somebody to give me a kidney.
Mm-hmm. So here's a donor outreach tip sheet, and you can take it and look it over. It provides some relevant information which you may want to include in your letter to help donors understand better what donation may mean for them. And it can provide reassurance and encouragement for them to take the next steps in exploring being a donor.
Wow, it's pretty long. Should I put all this in my letter? It would be really long.
Yeah, no, I would focus on what's important to you and what you think would be helpful for the potential donors that you're communicating with. So from your perspective, what are some of the things that are important to you about the message you send out?
Well, I guess I don't want people to feel pressured or obligated, and I don't want to strain my relationships or lose them as friends or family.
Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you let people know your concern around how they receive your donor outreach and how much their relationship means to you. It's okay to write from a personal perspective and to speak from your heart, but it's also important to keep it as factual as you can as well, so that it doesn't get too emotional. If a potential donor feels that you're really desperate or really anxious, it can make them a little wary to proceed because they don't want to disappoint you or let you down. So they may never explore it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I hadn't thought about that. But that's a good point. So once I've got the letter ready, I should just email it out there or put it on Facebook or something, or?
Well, I would think about who you want to approach first. Closer connections and people who have some relationship with you are the best place to start. So you may want to email your close family separately and then branch out from there. You certainly can use Facebook, but it's important to remember if you have a lot of friends on Facebook and they share your story, it's quite possible that people you don't know will be seeing it.
Oh, yeah, I guess. But wouldn't it make sense that the more people who see it, the better?
Yeah, but there are more risks with people who you don't know, especially if they step forward to be screened and they don't let you know that they are. So they have an advantage of knowing who you are, but you don't necessarily know them or anything about them. So at the transplant centers, we do our best to screen out people who don't have good motives, but it's more difficult when the donor doesn't know the recipient. The transplant team can't control if this person may make contact with you in the future or have expectations about a relationship with you that maybe you're not interested in having, or perhaps try to use the donation for their own personal gain somehow. So you have to be prepared for those kinds of risks and unknowns.
Oh, yeah, well, it would be uncomfortable if the donor knew who I was, but I didn't know who they were, I guess.
Yeah, and that's not to say there haven't been successful donor-recipient matches between pairs who don't know each other. You just need to be aware there are more risks, which come along with people stepping forward you don't know, and decide if you're prepared for that emotionally should a problem arise in the future.
Yeah, well, that could be stressful.
It's usually people who know you or have a connection to you who will see donation through to the end. And so your close family and friends are really the best place to start. And if you're, after your close circle of family and friends, you would then be thinking about approaching any groups or associations that you might be involved with, like your church, or if you do volunteer work. You can approach the connections you have in those groups. You're more likely to receive successful matches from those social circles.
Oh, okay. Well, no, that sounds great. Do you think we could meet next week and I could get you to look over my letter? I mean, I'm thinking that just writing the letter, the process of writing the letter too, is going to help me get more comfortable, with the language around asking for a kidney.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd be happy to look it over. And I've got an example letter here that you can take with you and read. It can give you ideas on how you might want to draft your own letter or email. People who find writing difficult are welcome to just change things in it so it reflects their personal situation. But for others, it can just serve as a guide in what to be considering. And feel free to contact me sooner if you get stuck or you want to discuss this before we meet next time.
Okay. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, so what sticks out for you in terms of that role play? What did you think was helpful and what worked well? Does anybody have, oh, Claire?
Hi. I really like the part about soliciting a donor and explaining about a donor may know who you are and Sharon may not know who that donor, and then the issues around that.
Right.
That was important.
So understanding the risks of when you're going farther out than people that are known to you. Yeah, it's important for them to be aware, especially if it's 5 or 6 or 7 years from now that donor comes forward with expectations. It's challenging. Andrea?
I just wanted to speak to the piece around patients being anxious to tell people from the stance of they're worried that they're going to lose relationships. That comes up a lot for us with the patients, and going back to, again, making generalized letters to a larger group and telling people, well, when you say you need a transplant, you can tell your friends or family to contact the transplant centers directly. So it kind of leaves them out of that equation at the start.
Yes.
So donors don't feel that if they don't want to proceed or if there's a barrier that they need to avoid that person because they don't want to tell them.
Yes.
Because, yeah. All I wanted to
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, for some recipients, they may want to invite people they're reaching out to discuss it with them if they're comfortable with that. But certainly the other option is to just make sure that the transplant center's information is also right on their letter, and to reassure them also that they can be letting donors know that they can explore donation confidentially, that they're not obligated to donate just because they're exploring and getting information. And that, again, it's a really good point because it can reassure donors that they're going to be in charge of this process too, and able to do it in a confidential way. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Any other questions or comments at all? One of the things that there's a provincial committee that's working on our tools to assist staff in these conversations. So for some staff members, as we talked about, there's more of a comfort level with this than for others. But certainly the tools not only can be helping the recipients in terms of putting together their communication, but can also help guide your conversation and remind you of some of these points, some of these education facts that will help recipients move forward as well. And so that will be hopefully getting rolled out in the fall. And then the example letter as well will be something that recipients can take and use. Okay, thanks very much.
Carolyn?
Yeah?
I have a quick question here from Kamloops.
Hi.
and I don't know, you might not be able to answer it or direct me yet, but so we have cases where we're doing donor outreach with our patients, and the process of a referral to transplant for the recipient may have been started, but it might not have been fully processed yet. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so they might not be in the system, but if they do these letters, and because we are encouraging them to start early because it takes so much time to sometimes find a donor, if potential donors phone into Transplant to say, hey, I'd like to donate to my sister, brother, whomever, and that person's not in the system yet, what happens with those potential donors?
I'm going to let Sharon answer this question. Good question.
Hi. If a referral has been initiated, which is often the case, then we'll still pull that information off of Promise, and we'll send the information out to donors and speak to donors. If the individual, the recipient's not, if the referral hasn't been initiated, but they're still in Promise, we would still send them some information, and the donor some information, and help them to at least start looking at, the medical information, talk a little bit about the process, etc., and let them know that, we may not know where the recipient's going to be referred. So it could be that if they're referred to St. Paul's and they're talking to a VGH team, that they may start their file with one group and finish with another. But we do our best to sort of stick handle that. I think my philosophy a little bit too is that with donors, it may take them some time to actually get the courage to call and start making inquiries. And so if we can get information out to them, then that bodes well for, their future interest in donation. I don't know if that answers the question, but we try our best.
Okay, Carolyn, this is Connie. Carolyn.
Hi, Connie. Hi, Connie.
Hi. I was just wondering if you have any suggestions as far as concerns for the donor financially, like with the recipient saying it costs too much money.
Right. So if a recipient is saying one of the reasons they don't want to do outreach is they're concerned about how this will impact the finances of the potential donors. So there's two pieces of information that can help with that. More and more we're seeing private companies are allowing employees to use their sick benefits. So in terms of taking time away from work, kidney donation is being honored and seen as a legitimate medical reason to be off work. So more and more people are accessing their private benefits. If people pay into employment insurance, they're able to access their employment insurance benefits for the time that they're off. And then the last thing is there is a low DIRP program, which is a national program, a reimbursement program. And it depends on the eligibility in terms of the donor's situation, but particularly for donors who are self-employed and don't have benefits, this program allows 8 weeks with it's structured quite like EI to give them some loss of income subsidy. It also allows for travel, so if people are coming from out of town, that's another important point, is that recipients understand that donors don't have to be local. They can come from other parts of the province or other parts of the country, as well as even in some cases from other countries. And this program has some allowance for travel, for accommodation, for meals, and that kind of thing. So finances are a consideration that potential donors need to consider, because there may be out-of-pocket expenses associated with donation, but certainly these programs help offset the financial burden of donation.
Thank you.
Any other questions?